By-elections don't come much bigger than this. The Greens didn't just win it, it was a blowout. They stormed to victory. I'm joined by Aaron Bastani, who is straight back from Manchester. You were there. Are you exhausted? You haven't had so much sleep?
Exhausted? No, I'm pretty tired. I've had 3 hours sleep.
Energised?
Well, look, if the Greens had lost, I'd be like, Michael, I don't quite fancy it so much. But it's been an extraordinary story. We'll talk about it. I think easily the most important by-election of my lifetime. Yeah,
and we'll be talking about it for the next hour. I won't do any trails because we're just talking about this story. I'm expecting loads of you to be tuning in. Enormous day for British politics. Before we get started, of course, don't forget to support our work. We always appreciate it. You can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As ever, you can listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The polls had suggested it was a dead heat. The result was, in fact, a blowout. In the Gorton and Denton by-election, the Green candidate Hannah Spencer won the constituency by more than 4,000 votes.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a politician. I'm a plumber. And 2 weeks ago, during all this, I also qualified as a plasterer. Because even in chaos, even under pressure, I get things done. I am no different to every single person here in this constituency. I work hard. That is what we do. Except things have changed a lot over the last few decades, because working hard used to get you something. It got you a house, a nice life, holidays. It got you somewhere. But now, working hard, what does that get you? Because talk to anyone here and they will tell you. The people who work hard but can't put food on the table, can't get their kids' school uniforms, can't put their heating on, can't live off the pension they worked hard to save for, can't even begin to dream about ever having a holiday, ever. Because life has changed. Instead of working for a nice life, we're working to line the pockets of billionaires. We are being bled dry. And I don't think it's extreme or radical to think working hard should get you a nice life. And I don't think that if you're not able to work, that you should still have a nice life. I think that absolutely everybody should get a nice life. And clearly, I'm not the only person who thinks that.
So that was the hate-filled, sectarian speech of a woman intent on destroying British democracy. We'll go into some of those allegations later in the show. First off, let's remind you of the result from last night in Gorton and Denton. So the Greens on 40.7% of the vote, up 28 points compared to 2 years ago at the general election. Reform with Matt Goodwin on 28.7%. Labour in third place with 25.4%. And the Conservatives lost their deposit, 1.9%. The Lib Dems, similarly unimpressive, on 1.8%. Aaron, on our shows this week, we keep saying, oh, it's a dead heat, it's neck and neck. The polling was showing it, incredibly neck and neck, all within the margin of error, sort of saying 30%, 30%, 30%. People didn't see this coming.
Zach Polansky claims he did. Zach Polansky was actually pretty confident in the days before the vote. He told me. He said he was confident because he had no choice. He said, look how unpopular Keir Starmer is. Look how good our candidate is. Matt Goodwin wasn't the best candidate Reform could put up. The Workers' Party weren't running. So there was a really good confluence of circumstances for the Greens to have a really good result. And Zach Polansky said, if we can't win this, we have to kind of re-examine our strategy to pick up more MPs just generally. So he was quite confident by virtue of having to be confident in his own words. We're not going to talk about it much, but the Tory result is crazy. I think it's their worst by-election result, certainly in my lifetime, less than 2%, let alone keeping their deposit. Labour's vote halved. Now, often with by-elections, people say, well, that's because the turnout's much lower. That's not true here. They've literally seen their vote in absolute terms halved. The Reform result is quite good. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But there are two Reform and UKIP by-election results, which are where we should be thinking here in terms of context. So Runcorn last year, I believe they got about 12,000 votes there. So they didn't do as well as Runcorn, but that still wouldn't have won their seat. If they'd got 12,000 votes like they did in Runcorn, they, outdid themselves with Sarah Pochin, they wouldn't have won this seat. Haywood and Middleton in 2014 with UKIP again, they did really well. They almost won that. They lost by a couple of hundred votes. That was about 10,100 votes they got there. So again, that wouldn't have been enough here. This is not about, Reform not doing as well as they should. The two big stories are Labour collapsing, losing literally half of their vote, and the Greens exceeding all expectations. Even half an hour before the result was announced, the Greens were saying, we think we've got maybe 1,000 majority. The claim is, and I don't know if this is true or not, the claim is they even beat Labour on postal votes, which is why Labour started making noises so early saying, well, we've lost, because that was the banker for Labour. And as soon as they realised they'd lost that, then it was all over.
You were at the Greens after party. It didn't look like a normal by-election event. So that was Deputy Leader Muffin Ali crowd surfing at the Greens sort of victory party, I suppose. I didn't know that. Do you normally have a party at a by-election? Is that normal?
I've never been to anything like that. And I have to say, Michael, it offered a microcosm of the campaign, logistically so well organised. Your sound people, security, about 500 people in there all night, speeches, etc., including Zach Polanski and Hannah Spencer at the end. For me, it was emblematic of this now being a mainstream party that's really good at getting things done.
It was, as you say, it wasn't a completely terrible night for Reform, because this isn't really a target seat for them. They did terribly at the general election there. This has been Labour for a century, and it has a big ethnic minority voter base. So it's not like those red wall seats that they're expected to win. However, Matt Goodwin didn't take the defeat well.
Matthew Goodwin, you hoped to be Reform's 9th MP. What went wrong? Because it wasn't even close.
Sectarianism. That's what happened. We more than doubled our vote. We're in Labour's backyard. We're the second political force in this seat. We have planted a flag in Northern England. You'll have seen the Reform boards up and down this constituency. More than 10,000 people voted for us. We can go on to Labour constituencies across Northern England, into the Red Wall, into Wales. We can win those seats. We will win those seats. Again, the Greens can only pull this kind of result off in a small number of seats. We can do this everywhere. Our ground game is the best game in British politics. We're not resorting to sectarian politics to get us over the line. I think we've run a very professional campaign. I think we've connected with the local people. Again, not many British people want legalised crack cocaine and heroin, open borders, scrapping our nuclear deterrent. The reason the Greens have won here, let's be honest, is exactly what that report was warning about a few hours ago. Family voting, otherwise known as sectarianism. Now, we can have a conversation in this country about sectarianism and what it's doing to our democracy, or we can pretend it's not happening. It's clearly happening.
So we're going to talk sort of later in the show in a lot more detail about this issue of family voting and sectarianism, which is sort of emanating, the Reform Party is speaking about it most loudly, but it's being echoed in much of the media. He sounds like a sore loser, though.
He's whinging. And I think this is a real concern for Reform, is that they're becoming the party of moaning and whinging and negativity. One of the reasons why Nigel Farage has been such a successful politician over the last 20 years is he's a bit of a boy. The same with Trump. There's a bit of a swagger. He's quite captivating. But all Reform now seem to do is talk about pseudo-events, micro-stories in the Telegraph, whinge, moan, complain. Now, sometimes the things they're whinging about really resonate with the voters, migration numbers, small boats. But they've taken that approach now to literally everything. They just whinge and moan about secondary education or housing or anything. And I think that relentless negativity actually starts to grind voters down. People want a bit of hope, a bit of optimism. They want to think that, yes, of course, you can highlight grievances, but you can also solve them. And I think Reform have forgotten how to speak in that register. Farage takes you on a journey, doesn't he? He's a character. He's a personality. You're not getting that with Matt Goodwin there. You're just getting relentless negativity and moaning and whinging. You'd get so much more goodwill from potential Reform voters who didn't bother to vote or maybe voted Labour, maybe even voted Green, who knows? You'd get so much more goodwill from those people if you say, I don't agree with everything they said. I think some of their policies are absolutely crazy, but they did a great campaign. We take it on the chin. We move on. We learn. I think lots of people would say, good for you. That they're incapable of doing that. Their political DNA is becoming paranoiac, conspiratorial, denialist. It's sectarianism if we lose, it's community cohesion if we win. And frankly, when you're confronted with a strong candidate like Hannah Spencer, it doesn't work and you look stupid.
I suppose in a way you could say, I mean, I don't know how much he thought it through, but there is an argument that Matt Goodwin was making an argument not for the constituency, because obviously he was insulting the voter base there basically, but for the nation. So they're saying, look, this by-election isn't a story where you should think of us reformers losers. You should think of the citizens of this constituency as dangerous. And I suppose you've been to the constituency twice. You were there for voting yesterday. You were there canvassing a couple of weeks ago. Well, you weren't canvassing, but talking to canvassers a couple of weeks ago. What do you make of this allegation that this is the Greens have been whipping up sectarianism and ethnic hatreds?
Well, they haven't. But I also think that you're denigrating voters there, and it's not going to work for you. I met lots of people who were planning to vote Reform or weren't planning to vote the Greens, but said, oh, it's great that there's a local plumber. It's great there's somebody with a Northwest accent and a bit of a connection to the constituency, particularly when Burnham had been blocked by party HQ with Labour. So all of a sudden that local connection became, it went under the spotlight with regards to the other parties. That's how people felt. And all of a sudden, most people see a white British lady with nice blonde hair who's done some plastering videos and is a plumber and has greyhounds, and you're talking about her like she's Osama bin Laden. The average punter just thinks, what the hell is going on? What the hell is going on? And you might think, oh, Aaron, you're not being serious. Look at the voter turnout. Matt Goodwin got, I think we've got it here, 10,000, 11,000 votes?
Yeah, I mean, I've got the percentages here, but yeah, I think Labour and Reform both got around 9,000 and the Greens got 13,000.
I think circa 10,000, something like that, right? The point is Sarah Potion got 12,000 votes, and I do think that would have been the upper limit. So this is not a good campaign for Reform, but it's also not a bad campaign. I do think if, say, somebody like Zia Yusuf had run for Reform, they would have done better, because he's a bit more of an optimistic, positive person. He's got a story that he can tell. He's also Muslim. I think that probably would have made some inroads into the local Muslim community. There's a reason why Reform wanted a debate between Zia Yusuf and Zach Polansky, because I think they viewed, probably correctly, Zia Yusuf, quite charismatic, successful British Muslim guy, saying, look, we want your votes. This is the thing. Reform, you can't tell people not to vote for you. You want as many people to vote for you as possible. Reform seems to now be in this habit of telling people, we don't want your vote. If you're young and, you're sort of progressively coded, we don't want your vote. If you're a woman and you believe in, equal rights for men and women at work, we don't want your vote. If you're a university graduate, you're woke, we don't want your vote. If you're Muslim, we don't want your vote. It's a dangerous game to play. Yes, of course, you've got your base, but you're not going to win off the back of that base. That's the bare minimum. You need to have something beyond it. If they want to win a parliamentary majority, they can't just think, yeah, we want, white C2DE voters in, post-industrial towns. That's lots of seats, by the way, but you're not going to form a government with it. So I think back to the drawing board for Matt and Nigel.
I suppose, one part of that analysis, well, not Matt Goodwin's analysis, because, he's trying to make it seem like this undemocratic, sinister thing, which I have absolutely no time for. It is, though, the case that the electoral coalition which the Greens managed to mobilise at this election exists in many constituencies, definitely doesn't exist in a majority of constituencies. So this is a constituency that had, I think it's sort of the 30th most Muslim in the country, something along those lines, and then also has a sort of young, progressive activist, middle-class kind of base, which is sort of what seemed to be the two core groups now of Green Party support. And so in many ways, this was a seat which was sort of designed for the Greens' new electoral project and their new electoral coalition.
I think that's really fair. Lots of people are saying, oh, this wasn't even in the Greens' top 120 target seats. This is a seat made for the Greens. Levenshulme, it feels like continuity Corbynism. These were the people that 10 years ago with the young graduates, now they're starting families, they've got 2-3 kids, they've got their mortgages. Many of them voted for the Greens. I saw the garden stakes outside their front doors. And then, of course, you have a large Muslim community too. Really important to say, Michael, they didn't all vote for the Greens. Many of them voted for the Labour Party. And something that a Labour activist told me, and it perhaps explains why some of the polling wasn't so accurate, is that in multi-generational households, their experience was that older members of the family were staying with Labour. Not all of them. Some of them were very angry about changes with indefinite leave to remain. But younger members of those families were going to the Greens. And the polling wasn't capturing that, and that's one reason why, perhaps, actually, the Greens did much better than people expected. So this idea that the Greens got all the Muslim vote isn't true. And here's something really important, Michael. I think 66% of the vote in the constituency went either Green or Labour. So 66% of the vote is, you can say, centre-left, right? This wasn't like a reform gimme, but, you know, the Greens won on the back of the Muslim vote. There probably wasn't even that much tactical voting in the end, I think. I think many people voted the way they wanted to vote.
Well, it's difficult to have tactical voting if you don't know what the tactical vote is, because obviously the Labour Party were putting out flyers saying it's us or reform.
Yeah, lying.
Lying, yeah. I mean, the Greens were sort of also saying that, but I mean, the Greens were kind of telling the truth now, we can see, whereas Labour weren't.
Well, Labour are claiming they had a ton of voter contacts, and I struggle to believe they had the data they had and came to the conclusions they came to. At the very least, it would have looked like the two were neck and neck. I mean, that's what the opinion polling that we saw suggested. But they were saying, no, our returns are showing us well ahead. I
think the General Secretary was saying that, you know, the Greens haven't got a hope in hell.
No.
They must be smoking the crack that they want to legalise if they think that they can win this seat.
Turns out that was just a press release, Michael. Turns out it's all bullshit.
I'm just going to correct myself. I got the numbers slightly wrong. Obviously, because I've got the percentages in front of me. I just got it up now. So the Greens got 14,980 votes. Reform, you were right, Aaron, they got 10,578, and then Labour, 9,364. The Conservatives, 706. Let's take a look at Keir Starmer's response.
The entire Labour Party, the entire movement came together to fight a positive campaign about bringing our communities and our country together. And we were fighting two parties, Reform on the right with their politics of hatred and division, the Greens on the left with their politics of getting out of NATO in the middle of the conflict with Ukraine, of legalising all drugs, including heroin and crack cocaine, to give to adults.
They want to give heroin and crack cocaine to adults? I knew they wanted to give it to kids, but adults? That's an outrage. God. If I thought that they were only selling it to the children, I might be okay with the Greens, but crack cocaine and heroin to adults, that's outrageous. He can't even get his lines right. My question for you, Aaron, did they run a positive campaign? He's saying, we ran a positive campaign in this constituency.
It's crazy, isn't it? I think he's losing brain cells by the hour right now. You know, he said at the outset of that clip, we ran a positive campaign. He then says these ridiculous things about, well, NATO. I mean, that's not so ridiculous. There's some truth to that. Zach Polansky's been very critical of NATO. The drug stuff is crazy. They've just got a public health approach with drugs. And you don't have to agree with that, but it's the approach that Portugal has.
It's not actually, but...
The broader frame about looking at drugs as more of a public health thing rather than a criminal justice thing is kind of a reframe that I think that's what's useful with what the Greens are.
I'll just clarify what I was saying in terms of people think. So their position at the moment is to legalise the sale of drugs, of all drugs, which no one seems to have at the moment. Portugal, it's decriminalised to take it. The Greens, it's going to be legal to sell it. Now, my analysis here is we don't need to obsess over this because Zach Polansky is a new leader. The Greens have only just become a major party. They're going to have to do some serious thinking about their policies so that they can then justify them and then are a bit more thought through. I think too many people on the left say, oh, it's public health.
No, but I think this is really important. So you're right. They're a new party. They need to refine these things. Guess what? I want the country to succeed. Right? I want the country to succeed. And where I think there's wisdom, what the Greens are saying about their drugs policy is the fact that they've got a public health approach like Glasgow, like Portugal. Now, I agree with you, the details of it are a bit, okay, let's not go there. But actually, that's a good jumping off point for a sensible conversation about, I think, drugs generally. There are many things I disagree with from the Greens in recent years. HS2. I'm first to say it. HS2, nuclear power. So I'm not here to puff up the Greens. I just think, actually, that's something they contribute, that would be quite useful, although all the details I don't really agree with. But that wasn't the craziest stuff that the Labour Party said. You know, the Labour Party was saying that the day of the campaign, maybe we're going to get this up later, the day of the campaign, they were saying that the Green Party want your daughters to become prostitutes. I mean, it's just an outlandish thing. I have a daughter. If I was the Green Party candidate and Labour was saying, I want people's daughters to become sex workers, you would have to physically restrain me. That makes me so angry. It's an outrageous, abominable thing to say. So it takes incredible front to say we ran a propositional positive campaign and then say stuff like that. But that's Keir Starmer, I'm afraid.
We had the image on the show last night. I did a segment on it with Helena hosting, of course. I'm not sure if we have the image now, but I can read out what was on this van. So it's a van with the picture of, with an image of Zach and Hannah Spencer, and it says, "To all voters, do not listen to these people. Do not vote for the Greens. They want to legalise all drugs and teach our children how to use them, including crack and heroin, and let our daughters be used for legal prostitution." So I think they have a decriminalisation policy when it comes to prostitution. Again, one can debate that, but the idea they want to sell your particular daughters into prostitution is bizarre. Also, they made up, we did this all on last night's show, as I say, they also made up this tactical voting organisation and put it through people's leaflets saying this tactical vote, the tactical choice or whatever, says you should vote Labour. Like, Labour ran a dirty campaign.
Very dirty.
And they lost.
They lost badly. They got fewer than 10,000 votes.
Starmer is really doubling down, though. He doesn't seem to be changing his strategy on calling the Greens extremists. So this is a little bit more of that interview we just showed you.
They are the extremes in politics. They can identify the grievances. It's only Labour that can unite the country and communities, and only Labour that's rolling up its sleeves and getting on the hard yards, which is actually how do we turn this around, providing the solutions. That's what we're focused on. But we were fighting the extremes of the right and the extremes of the left. We are changing lives. That's what we came into politics to do, to fight for the people who need better lives, not just identify the grievances, not just tear our communities apart, but provide the solutions and unite the country.
Now, Starmer is also repeating those claims, or did also repeat those claims in a letter sent to all Labour MPs today. So it said, these are just sort of some select quotes from it. It was quite long. He says, "Instead of a Labour MP who can be a local champion delivering for Gorton and Denton alongside a Labour government and a Labour mayor, the people of Gorton and Denton now have a representative who is more interested in dividing people than uniting them." That's a nice plumber we showed you the clip of earlier. He says, "We've seen the true colours of Zach Polansky's Greens in this campaign. The Greens were able to capitalise on an endorsement from George Galloway to win over enough voters to push them over the line. Their willingness to welcome Galloway's divisive sectarian politics is a sign that the Greens are not the harmless environmentalists they pretend to be. And their position on legalising all drugs shows how unstable this electoral coalition is. It cannot survive a general election campaign. We will continue to warn of the risk the Greens pose, the risk of extreme policies like legalising all drugs and pulling out of NATO that most voters strongly reject, and the risk of splitting the progressive vote so that reform come through the middle." This idea, I suppose that there's two issues here, isn't it? Sort of saying the Greens are wrong because they're extreme. So before it was the Greens are wrong. Well, no, it wasn't the Greens. It's like the Greens are irrelevant. They're irrelevant and silly. And now they're extreme and dangerous. But then also this idea, I mean, it is just very patronising to, and this is very clearly about the Muslim vote, right? He's saying they got an endorsement from George Galloway, and George Galloway is this soothsayer, or, you know, this
the Pied Piper of British Muslims.
That's the word I was looking for. The Pied Piper of British Muslims. And so now all of these Muslims are being duped into voting for Zach Polansky and the Greens. Like, it's quite gross stuff, really.
I mean, I interviewed George Galloway a few years ago now, and, you know, he said that gay people aren't normal. And I said, look, because George Galloway's an older man, you know, maybe it's, you know, generational sort of linguistic differences. I said, you mean typical? Because, of course, that's true. They're not typical. Heterosexuality is typical, statistically. He said, no, they're not normal. So the idea that, you know, Zach Polansky requires somebody like George Galloway, they have very different, people watching this will like one or the other, or maybe both of them, but I think we can all agree they're quite different in terms of their policies, LGBT issues, drugs. You know, Galloway is much more socially conservative. And this argument just falls apart, right? And it's coming from both the left and, the right rather, and the centre-left. Allegedly, Keir Starmer is on the centre-left. You know, you have patriarchal, socially conservative Muslims voting for a gay Jewish guy and a white British lady who has greyhounds. I mean, it's ridiculous, and it's actually quite laughable. In terms of Keir Starmer as well, he was saying, you know, we can unite the British public. Yeah, you've united the British public against you. They don't like you. You know, you're less popular according to some data, although I find this hard to believe, than Liz Truss, right? You've united people against you. We'll do the hard work of governing. There's been 15 U-turns under this government. There is something so strange about this man so detached from reality, where he's talking about we're the unifiers, we're being positive while talking about drugs and sex work, and saying about how, Labour's delivering while actually nobody knows of a government which has self-inflicted so much damage so quickly. So is he losing his marbles? I don't know. Is he in a bunker and not getting good advice? I don't know. He seems like somebody just incredibly detached from political reality. You just came third in a by-election in what was a very safe seat. You need to show a little bit of self-reflection. And by the way, Keir Starmer was the first to say this about Jeremy Corbyn after 2019. When you lose, you're wrong, not the voters. You've got to listen to them. Except when it's Keir Starmer, it's the voters, and actually he doesn't need to think.
It could have been so different for Labour, right? We could have been having a completely different story today, where we could have been saying, Labour now have this new popular MP in Parliament. They've got this new future in front of them. They've shown that they can win in their heartlands. It could have been a really positive story, maybe not for Keir Starmer, but for the Labour Party, if they had let Andy Burnham stand. And we'll be discussing in a moment if we think he would have won. First, though, let's take a look at Carl Turner. He's a backbench Labour MP, explaining his views on Radio 4 this morning.
Labour MPs are cheesed off, not just because of what's happened in the last 18 months of a Labour government, because the last 4 years. Yeah. Look, Keir Starmer's a mate of mine, by the way. He's a pal. He'll not be happy about hearing what I'm saying. But I begged him, Justin, don't block Burnham. Bring him in. Use Andy Burnham. He thinks he's the king of the north.
What did he say to you when you begged him?
He's very polite, Keir Starmer. He's a gentleman. He says, thanks very much for your advice, Carl. You're a great man. Thank you very much. And then ignores every word you've said. I said, don't go in a room with the NEC, Keir. Tell them that you're washing your hair. You've got something on. You're washing your barnet today. You can't be there. What did he do? He went in the room and he said, block Burnham. What a mess we're in as a result of it. Listen, we can't rewrite history, can we? But the reality is this. I can bet you now, without any problem whatsoever, Andy Burnham would have won that by-election yesterday without a shadow of a doubt. That's the truth, and we can't deny it.
And to his credit, Burnham did actually, in fact, predict Labour's defeat. So this was a tweet he posted on the weekend he was blocked. So Tom Baldwin, who's close to Keir Starmer, his biographer, I think, said, I've always liked Andy Burnham, but the prospect of him returning to Westminster has already added to inward-looking psychodrama that does no one any good, and an unnecessary by-election for Mayor of Manchester might well have resulted in long-term damage to his reputation too. And in response to that, Andy Burnham said, I'm not sure losing a by-election does us any good either, Tom. So Burnham could see that if it wasn't him, they would lose, and they have lost. Do you think Andy Burnham would have won?
Yes.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been a walk in the park, though. Labour got less than 10,000 votes. Burnham might have got, say, 15, 16,000. You could have had a very competitive race where Reform still get what they get and the Greens get like 11, 12,000. Fundamentally, I think many people who voted Green would have backed Burnham as an instrument of getting rid of Keir Starmer. I think that's the thing that people have kind of already forgotten, is that if you really dislike Keir Starmer, strangely enough, you would have voted Labour. And I think that's what would have got Andy Burnham over the line. Besides the fact, of course, he has a very, very good political brand in that part of the world. When I was up in the constituency the first time a few weeks ago, got talking to this older couple, and they voted for Brexit. You don't meet many people nowadays that still talk about Brexit. They liked Boris. They weren't Labour voters, but they voted for Burnham as mayor. They said, we love Andy Burnham. And there are quite a few people like that in that part of the world. So I think for those two reasons, Burnham's personal brand and the fact that he was uniquely this instrument to actually get rid of the PM, I think he would have won. Although it wouldn't have been some, Saddam-style majority. I think it would have been competitive.
A third reason, though, might be that the Greens wouldn't have fought it so hard. Because obviously, Zach Polansky has said he's open to some kind of progressive alliance. I mean, I think he does, depending on who he's speaking to, sometimes he excludes Labour from that and sometimes he doesn't. I'm not sure. But I don't think the Greens could have mounted a very successful campaign against Andy Burnham, who has spoken so publicly about wanting some kind of progressive alliance and wanting proportional representation. I don't think you could have mobilised the same number of Green activists to stand against that man.
Absolutely not. I mean, they had thousands of people, I think, on the day of the vote, you know. They had 2,000 people confirmed, but then, of course, more people come along and some people drop out. So let's say 2,000 people. I mean, you know, I was at the event, there were 500-600 people there throughout the whole thing. I think that's fair, but equally, you know, it's hard to speculate, isn't it? Because Andy Burnham's political brand also would have been damaged by having to toe the line of Keir Starmer over a month and being pictured with, you know, the least popular man.
Well, he wouldn't have toed the line, though, would he? He'd
Probably
have just been saying this Epstein-Mandelson stuff is outrageous.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? There would have been these moments during the campaign where, you know, he would have been asked about Mandelson, he would have been asked about Morgan McSweeney, and depending on what answer he gives, you know, his popularity would have gone up or down.
We're going to discuss in one moment whether this will result in a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer. Before that, we have 4,600 of you watching, which I love to see on a Friday evening. I hope you will agree for analysis of how the Greens, as well as Reform, to be fair, are upending British politics. There is nowhere better to tune into than Novara Media. I have to say, in this particular by-election, we've done very well in sending Aaron up twice to Manchester, one for a video sort of following canvassers, speaking to people in the community, which got 250,000 views. I don't know if that swung any votes. And then also last night to The Count. So I hope you consider this a demonstration of how we plan to continue expanding as an organisation, sending our fantastic journalists around the country. Of course, none of this comes for free. So if you do want to, I suppose, help for us fill our battle fund for elections to come.
For May, Michael.
For May, of course.
We've got the local elections in May, you know, and I want to get on the road and do a lot more of these videos like we did in Gorton and Denton.
Bastani's Britain.
Bastani's Britain. So if you want to support our work, go to novaramedia.com/support. Links in the description below. And, you know, if you haven't got that much money, just do it for 2 or 3 months. Do it till May. I'm not meant to say that. Do it till May and then, you know, don't cancel the direct debit.
Yeah.
But do it till May, and I think you'll want to stick with us because we're gonna offer something really unique in terms of media coverage.
Yeah. Obviously, it might also be the case that we'll be covering a new Labour leadership election at some point to decide our next Prime Minister. Let's look at what Angela Rayner said today, potentially sort of the favourite to replace Keir Starmer. She said, "This result must be a wake-up call. It's time to really listen and to reflect. Voters want the change that we promised and they voted for. If we want to unrig the system, if we want to make the changes we were sent into government to make, we have to be braver. A Labour agenda that puts people first, that's what all of us across our movement need to rededicate ourselves to this morning." So, yeah, I mean, it's not the most explicit statement. It's not, you know, there's no announcement in there, not particularly clear. Someone who isn't holding back, though, is Clive Lewis.
Look, we have an interim Prime Minister at the moment. How long that interim is will be up to the Parliamentary Labour Party. He will not be here for very long. He does not deserve to be here much longer. But it's for other people in the PLP, not just myself, to decide when that is. At the moment, if it went tomorrow, the only person I could see benefiting would be the Secretary of State for Health, Wes Streeting. And frankly, that would be more of the same. He's an acolyte of Peter Mandelson. There is no point electing Wes Streeting as our leader if that were to take place, because it would be more of the same. We need a radical reset, fundamental change, or we will have a reform government. And I'm afraid my colleagues and the rest of the party need to understand that.
I mean, from all the commentary I've been listening to and sort of, I suppose, you know, Angela Rayner's tweet and looking at it, doesn't seem like Keir Starmer is going to be toppled before May. There was that sort of moment where there was clearly some kind of plot to topple him and then it didn't work, which was a couple of weeks ago when Anna Sarwar came out and said he should stand down. And people thought that was maybe going to be the launch of a Wes Streeting or an Angela Rayner leadership challenge, and they bottled it. Is he going to be in place until those elections?
Yeah. They didn't bottle it. People are getting their campaigns in order, aren't they?
But why then did
I can tell you that for nothing. I know that. They are getting their campaigns in order.
But the argument about them bottling it was that who told Anas Sarwar that that was a good time? Because clearly he thought that someone else was going to.
Well, there's just a different political logic in Scotland, isn't there? You know, I think Welsh and Scottish Labour are going to be hurting the most after May. And even I think Anna Sarwar in the last 24 hours has said, vote Scottish Labour in May and hold your nose. He said something like this. Yeah. Just you don't say that. So I think he's just thinking about the survival and the success of Scottish Labour. You know, it's very possible, if the polling is correct, and it's not close right now, things can change, that Scottish Labour finished third behind Reform. which is just crazy. You know, the idea that the SNP and Reform would be the two major parties of Scotland is wild. Similar dynamic in Wales, right? The top two right now can change, could be wrong. The top two are Plaid Cymru and Reform. So I think that the nationalist parties have a separate dynamic going on. But those campaigns are being built. They are happening. They're getting staffers. You know, we had the story about the Angela Rayner website a few weeks ago. Very much in play. But you know what? They don't need to rush things. Keir Starmer is, he's not recovering anytime soon. We're probably not going to see a general election until 2028, 2029. Why rush? And wait till May. He probably goes around the conference speech this year, maybe just before, maybe just after. Maybe it's even, end of the year. There's no need to rush. It's not like they need to rescue the polling before it gets any worse. The polling is, I think it's fair to say, as bad as it's going to get. It's in the teens often. So, yes, the Sarwar thing was weird, but I think you'd explain it through the Scottish element.
Just because you were mentioning sort of the multi-party politics in Scotland and Wales, obviously they've got proportional representation. The end of two-party politics and now Labour being squeezed from the left down the right, the Conservatives are relevant. It is very difficult to see where a first-past-the-post system goes from here. Because looking at one constituency, it looks kind of simple, right? Oh, this was a constituency where the Greens made sense. People voted for at a general election, it's just going to be like, what the hell is going to happen? And I do, I don't want to be negative because I think this is a brilliant win for the Greens. I think they had a brilliant campaign. Keir Starmer absolutely deserved the bruising that he got. But I don't think the Greens can beat Reform on a national level. And this is a disaster for Labour. So if anything, is Nigel Farage not going to end the day thinking like, I'm even more sure of a majority than I was, yesterday?
I don't think it changes anything from that perspective. I think Reform is still on for, right now, a decent majority. What might change that is some kind of cooperation between the Liberal Democrats, Labour and the Greens to stop Reform, which I think is actually quite probable.
With a new leader.
With a new Labour leader, exactly. So I don't think anything changes in that regard. We've heard lots of noise from Reform. I don't think they're in a better or worse place. They could have done slightly better, but it's also not a bad result. What has changed now is you have the Green Party and you've got the Labour Party. Labour are trying to consolidate their vote by saying, we are the people that can lead, the coalition to stop Reform. That didn't work in Caerphilly. They lost to Plaid with that argument. They've just lost in Manchester, Gorton and Denton saying the same thing. And of course, that argument has loads of upside. You get loads of people lending you a vote to stop Reform. If you're the first, alternative, if you're the best alternative. If you're not, all of a sudden you collapse really quickly. And you're talking about like national votes and first past the post. Look, it's really important to remember this. The Lib Dems have about 70 MPs. They got 2%, less than 2%. The Tories have still, for now, lots of MPs. They got less than 2%. We are going to see such a strange election if this present trajectory continues. And for me, that just makes the argument for electoral reform more important. We have a crazy outcome on the way, and I don't think it lends itself to effective government.
Okay, because Labour are in a really difficult position now because, before they were saying vote Labour because otherwise it's Reform. And so they were hoping they could unite anyone sort of to the left of Reform. And they say, Reform are the extremist far-right fascist party, we're the only alternative. And what you hear from Keir Starmer today saying, actually the big problem is the extreme right and the extreme left, which isn't no longer putting yourself as sort of like the anti-fascist popular front. You're putting yourself as the defenders of the status quo. Anyone who's radical in any direction is bad. Vote for moderation, vote for more of the same, vote for us. Like it's not going to be a winning message.
And also, we already have the Liberal Democrats. They have 70-odd seats. It might work in some places. In the south of England, it's not going to help. In London, it's not going to help. There are lots of seats where people will rightly expect a Labour Green 1-2, right? In Scotland, it's not going to help. In Wales, it's not going to help because you've got Plaid Cymru. They need to go back to the drawing board, but like we said at the start, Keir Starmer isn't doing that. This is somebody who is detached from political reality.
Elite responses to anti-establishment politics always go through two phases. First, dismiss, ignore, or ridicule them. Then, if they don't go away, or worse, if they look like they can win, posit them as dangerous. Now, this happened to Jeremy Corbyn before 2017. He was mainly just mocked as a loser. Then after getting 40% in a general election, he was cast as a demonic, anti-Semite racist, a threat to the fabric of society. Something similar is happening now to the Greens. So before the Gorton and Denton by-election, they were cast as a bunch of sandal-wearing no-hopers. But now they've won, well, all of a sudden, they're a danger to democracy.
Matthew Goodwin, you hoped to be Reform's 9th MP. What went wrong? Because it wasn't even close.
Sectarianism. That's what happened.
I mean, this is clearly sectarian campaigning.
So the Gorton and Denton by-election is a victory. Yes, it's a victory for sectarian voting. It's a victory for cheating in elections.
Yes, the hippie vegans who want to legalise drugs are in fact a sectarian menace. In a statement posted to X after his defeat, Matt Goodwin said this statement: "We are losing our country. A dangerous Muslim sectarianism has emerged. We have only one general election left to save Britain. Vote reform every chance you get. I will continue the fight. I will always fight for you. I will stand at the next general election, Matt." And then you can see him solemnly looking at his smartphone as he posts send. Matt Goodwin, remember, is a man who wants to relitigate whether non-white people can be English. So it's a bit rich. He's now complaining about ethnic identity politics. The charge, though, against the Greens has spread beyond Reform politicians and GB News.
Why did you put a photograph of the Indian Prime Minister, a Hindu nationalist, in election videos for a constituency in Manchester?
Well, the point really is about international human rights. So, for instance, I'm a Jewish man, as I've talked about. There's only 5 Jewish people in British political history who have led political parties. So I take anti-Semitism in this country really seriously.
I asked you about the Indian Prime Minister.
No, but this is where I'm going. So we have a Keir Starmer who is having meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Modi, with Trump. There is a pattern to the people that Keir Starmer is pally. Now,
well, he's pally, as you put it, with prime ministers and presidents, which is what he's paid by us as taxpayers to do, isn't it? That's what his job is. Let me ask you again, why did you put a picture of a Hindu nationalist in election literature in Manchester?
Well, as I was saying, Nick, we need to have diplomatic relationships with world leaders, sure, with presidents and prime ministers. That's part of being a prime minister. That's very, very different to the cosy relationships that we've seen, particularly with Benjamin Netanyahu, where Keir Starmer went out on TV and radio and said that Israel had the right to cut off food, water and electricity from the Palestinians.
Shall I ask you for the third time about the Hindu nationalist leader, Narendra Modi? Why did you put the picture in a large Muslim population constituency of a Hindu in your election literature? Was it not to play to the racism of some voters?
I think the question is inherently verging on racism in itself. Modi is a authoritarian who whether you're Jewish, Muslim or you're non-faith, should have problems with the authoritarianism that Keir Starmer is working with in cosy ways. That's very different to having diplomatic relationships.
So you deny playing to racism?
Absolutely deny playing to racism. What I'm talking about there is peace, human rights, and calling out the bad decisions of this Prime Minister and this government and the kind of people that he's not just working with, but as I say, cozying up with and making deals with, whereas we're not working with other people, such as our European neighbours, in the way that we should.
Now, the attack from Nick Robinson there was a reference to a part of a video put out by the Greens, which showed Starmer with Narendra Modi. So you can see that image there. I mean, it appeared in videos which were in both Urdu and Bengali. Now, the idea is that this is a dog whistle to try and whip up Muslims who Nick Robinson is applying not just care about sort of politics in the subcontinent, but he's saying it's because they're racist against Hindus, essentially. He's saying, is this not a dog whistle? You're saying, Keir Starmer likes Hindus, you're Muslims, therefore vote for us because you hate Hindus. That seems to be the argument. It's obviously incredibly unfair, especially as Labour have done this too, right? So this is a flyer from the by-election in 2021 in Batley and Spen. Don't risk a Tory MP who is not on your side. And then in the top right, you've got Boris Johnson shaking hands with Narendra Modi. So there's nothing new. Neither is it new to put out campaign material in foreign languages, because Labour have done this too. This is a leaflet in Yiddish, which Labour produced for ultra-Orthodox areas of North London in 2010. However, all of a sudden, Now the Greens look like they might be a genuine electoral threat to the two major parties. This is a threat to democracy. Zach has been effectively pushing back, though. This is another clip from the BBC.
They are also claiming that the way you went away about your leafleting in some of the way you were campaigning was wrong, and you were using mechanisms that they don't think are fair. What's your response?
I mean, they sound like sore losers.
There's so many clips today where there's actually the best one was from Good Morning Britain, but they tried to give us like a copyright strike for a video earlier this week, so we didn't show it. But there's all these clips of hosts sort of putting questions to the Greens, or Zach Polansky specifically, which they seem kind of embarrassed to be saying. Like clearly they feel like they've suddenly now, because this has become a talking point, they've got to say it. And they say, but do you think that the fact that Muslim people vote, is that a bit weird? And then Zach's like, not really. The sectarian charge also got tied up with another allegation, that of so-called family voting. Now, this is something that not many people in political journalism had heard of until last night, when Sam Coates tweeted this. So we've got these, the eyes emojis, which means this is big news, something's going on here, guys. And then it says, the Electoral Commission give democracy volunteers access to polling stations at election time. Only they and the police can go inside. They've just issued this report about family voting in Gorton and Denton. Now, this is what democracy volunteers said about family voting. So they say, today we have seen concerningly high levels of family voting in Gorton and Denton. Based on our assessment of today's observations, we have seen the highest levels of family voting at any election in our 10-year history of observing elections in the UK. We rarely issue a report on the night of an election, but the data we have collected today on family voting, when compared to other recent by-elections, is extremely high. In the other recent Westminster parliamentary by-election in Runcorn and Helsby, we saw family voting in 12% of polling stations, affecting 1% of voters. In Gorton and Denton, we observed family voting in 68% of polling stations, affecting 12% of those voters observed. So what is family voting? Well, it's when more than one person goes into the voting booth at the same time. And it is illegal, so the law is there to prevent, for example, a husband pressuring his wife to vote a particular way. It's supposed to protect the complete secrecy of an individual's vote. And democracy volunteers, I mean, do also seem to be a legitimate organisation. They've been doing this kind of thing for a decade, although, you know, no one had heard of them before this. So it's like, oh, the democracy volunteers have said it's not right. It's not like the Carter Center. You know, like when we talk about elections in, say, Venezuela when they're contested, we say, okay, is this just sort of propaganda put forward by the right to try and delegitimize left-wingers, or is this for real? And if the Carter Center have said, actually, there were problems, okay, that's serious. They've been around for a very long time, very legitimate people. Democracy volunteers, I had not heard of them until yesterday. I'm pretty sure Sam Coates hadn't either. Founded by a former Lib Dem MP. Also, questions have been raised about their report, namely, why, if they saw so much illegality taking place, they didn't inform anyone at the time. So the returning officer running the by-election said this about the affair. Polling station staff are trained to look out for any evidence of undue influence on voters. No such issues have been reported today. If democracy volunteers were so concerned about alleged issues, they could and should have raised them with us during polling hours so that immediate action could be taken. We have operated a central by-election hub which has been rapidly responding to reported issues during the day in liaison with the police, who had a presence at every polling station where necessary. It is extremely disappointing that democracy volunteers have waited until after polls have closed to make such claims. Manchester Police have also said that no electoral crimes were reported to them during the vote, and the Electoral Commission also appears to be mystified, saying this: we are aware of the report. Electoral offences are a matter for the police. We encourage anyone who believes an offence has occurred to report it to the police. The statutory Electoral Observer Code of Practice says that electoral observers may bring potential irregularities, fraud or significant problems to the attention of elected officials on the spot. So this group, which no one had ever heard of, says they've seen people going into voting booths together. Or, I mean, the problem here is it's very ambiguous. What counts as this, right? Is it just that a husband and wife have gone into the polling booth together, or a couple of neighbours have gone into the polling booth and have a conversation about who they're going to vote for, or what's the correct box to tick, yada, yada, yada. Could be all sorts of things here. And then the Electoral Commission said, well, if this group saw it, they probably should have reported it. Nothing has been reported, it seems. Sam Coates, though, who I suppose first announced this to the world, sort of went big on this story. He thinks this is a big deal.
I was in Gorton and Denton and just trying to talk to people. I did speak to try to speak to a number of members of the South Asian community. Women turned to me and just said, no, my husband deals with that.
Gosh.
And I was quite struck by that. Obviously, we couldn't capture that on camera. And I think that this is going to dominate the night.
This is going to dominate the night. I love it when, like a political journalist says it like it's separate from them. This is going to dominate the night. It's like, well, you're kind of making it dominate the night.
This thing I've chosen is going to dominate the night. It's not about me. I'm not making all of this about me. It's not about these 75,000 people in this constituency who've engaged in a mass process of democracy. No, it's all about me and my chosen talking point. But honest God, it's the big story.
I mean, we've got more clips to go through, but this issue where there's things that have just happened forever, right? You have political parties who appeal. Yes, they have a broad message to the general population, and then they have targeted messages to different subsets of that population. The Tories have also done it, by the way. I saw a great video on social media yesterday of to the Indian community with Boris Johnson shaking hands with Modi, and then with all of this.
I mean, basically their campaigns in Harrow,
it's all about
a bilingual essentially. But anyway,
so yeah, it's nothing new. This issue of family voting has never been mentioned before.
No,
and now all of a sudden there is a anti-establishment party that is doing well, and suddenly now, oh my God, democracy is in crisis.
It's really simple. If you see somebody breaking the law, contact the police. I thought that's quite self-evident to most people, let alone boomer electoral observers who are part of an organisation started by a Liberal Democrat MP. So these are, I would have presumed, people who really care about process. Good, we need people like that in society, right? If you care about process and somebody is breaking the law and you see it with your own eyes, you need to report that to the police. Look, if you see that happening, you would obviously try and stop it or report it. If you don't try and stop it, but you wait until literally the close of polls, people can't vote anymore, and you then give it to the press in order to kick up a stink, I'm not going to necessarily ascribe good intentions to you. Maybe that's unfair of me, but I find it quite strange. You don't try and resolve that problem as it's happening. You wait, and then you give it to the media afterwards. I've never seen anything like this. And I think, maybe I'm wrong. That feels like an effort to undermine the legitimacy of a vote. Now, when this happened, people are saying, this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. In the end, the Greens won by, 4,400 votes. If the Greens had won by 200-300 votes, we would have heard no end of this saga. This would have been Stop the Steal, Manchester South edition. In terms of the sectarianism stuff, I mean, crazy. This idea that you'll have patriarchal Muslim men, who read Sayyid Qutb, who, Quranic scholars, who are, judiciously social conservative, and they've instructed their poor, exploited, dominated, set upon wives, you will, inshallah, you will vote by the will of God Almighty, you will vote for the white British lady with blonde hair and greyhounds. You will vote for the party led by the gay Jewish man. What the hell are you talking? You will vote for the party which was to legalize crack cocaine and heroin by the will of God, I tell you, woman. Come on, this is crazy. Like, this is La La Land. This is crazy. And the worrying thing is, Michael, large parts of the British media now give this stuff credibility. They believe in it. They believe that they either believe in it or they believe in the possibility of it. Sectarianism, by the way, is not when a party led by a Jewish guy and the candidate's white British attracts the votes of Muslims. That is not what sectarianism is. And here's the thing. Ash put it so well the other day on the show. Everybody was telling Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, 2018, 2019, you've lost the Jewish vote. But that's fine. You can talk about the British Jewish vote as a block vote, which, by the way, you shouldn't, right? In a liberal democracy, people are individuals. They can vote how they like. You lost the Jewish vote. Everybody said it for years. It's all I heard. I heard that phrase every day for years. But, if you say the Muslim vote, sectarianism, I've had enough. I'm tired of it. And on the Narendra Modi stuff, you're showing images of Narendra Modi and Keir Starmer. On the one hand, it's true. Keir Starmer's job as the Prime Minister is to talk to the elected head of state of India. And if Zach Polansky was the PM, I would like him to do the same, of course. But the way that Nick Robinson put it answered his own question. Why have you got images of the Hindu nationalist Narendra Modi with Keir Starmer? Because he's a Hindu nationalist. This man was a member of the RSS, an organisation which has been banned in India 3 times since Indian independence, which was connected to the man who murdered Mahatma Gandhi. These are fanatics, right? Now, it's the other side of the world. We don't need to worry about it too much. But if somebody is saying, look, he's a bit of a bad dude, this Narendra Modi, if you're claiming to be somebody who believes in human rights and yet you're with Modi, Netanyahu, there's a pattern here, right? And that's what the Greens did. It's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. What is good for the goose is good for the gander. They can't really go on the anti-Semitic stuff. They'd love to, by the way, because, of course, Zach Polanski's Jewish. So they've gone for this instead.
Yeah, I mean, it is also, I said on Wednesday, I think there's something a bit cheap about the whole Keir Starmer stood next to Narendra Modi, because I think that, they're the world's most populous country. He's the democratically elected leader. I think Keir Starmer should meet Narendra Modi. But there's nothing dangerous about putting that on a flyer, in the same way that every other political party forever has done this. So it's very similar to the Corbyn anti-Semitism, where it's sort of things that used to be normal and sort of didn't really get noted, or Corbyn's elections, let's say, suddenly are a crisis in democracy because someone you don't like is doing it. And
by the way, the public's tired of this, Michael. They're sick of it. And that's one of the reasons why Hannah Spencer won. They are sick of it. They want politics to make their lives better. They're not interested in this permanent nonsense and drama. They're not. You can't say what's going on in Gaza. You can't call it a genocide. But apparently sharing a photo, it's a real photo, it's not a fake photo, of Modi and Starmer, well, that's appalling. I mean, there is a reason that people are coming to organisations like Novara Media. It's because we are not just offering this low information slop.
Which is why we have got, with 16 people of 5,000 viewers, I wanted to say we've got over 5,000 people watching. Hopefully we'll get over 5,000 people by the end of the show. If you want to support Novara Media, we are funded by you guys. If you are already a supporter, if you've been a supporter for years, we love you. Thank you so much. You make all of this possible. If not, please do consider going to novaramedia.com/support. And we will continue doing what we like to think is pretty excellent coverage of elections for the rest of the year and for the rest of the decade, for the rest of the century, hopefully. Reform's Nigel Farage has now written to Manchester Police about the Democracy Volunteers report. It's unclear what they'll do about it. Labour have also called for an investigation. The Greens, for their part, have also said they'll support one too. Of course, it is important to note, if so-called family voting did take place, we have no idea who it would have benefited, right? The Democracy Volunteers haven't put in their report that there were all these very religious Muslim men forcing their wives to vote for the white English plumber lady. That's not what they've said. However, Reform's Nadeem Zahawi on Sky was happy to fill in the blanks.
Do you think that this election, from what you have seen, is illegitimate? And on the basis of what we've seen so far, should there be a challenge to the pretty convincing election result by the Greens right now?
Well, you broke the story earlier tonight about family voting, which is a euphemism for cheating, right? There is no such thing as family voting. I've stood in many elections, both local and national. I've never heard of anyone behaving in that way. And clearly, credible election observers demonstrated that there's at least 12% of the sample that they observed practice this cheating, this family vote. Maybe it's the same euphemism as grooming gangs, I don't know. But nevertheless, it is very dangerous, it's ominous, and it's bad. And we will consider our position and we'll look at all this stuff.
Do you think there's we're in very dangerous territory? Are you suggesting that this is an illegitimate result?
Let's see what the Electoral Commission says on this. I think it's important. It's unprecedented for serious election observers to put out a report at 1 minute past 10 saying something really, really bad has happened in this by-election. And I think it's important that we surface these issues, we raise these issues. We mustn't hide behind our finger. For far too long, I think we've allowed, and Nigel's spoken about this a decade ago, sectarianism into our democracy.
This is another trick they played with Corbyn and Labour, where they sort of said, you might think that this is explainable, but this hasn't happened before. There's never been a front page of the Times called Corbyn's Factory of Hate. The fact that there are issues being raised that have never been raised before is no longer a sign that maybe the Green Party are being treated differently to other parties. It's a sign that the Green Party must be exceptional compared to other parties, right? And it becomes this self-reinforcing thing. Oh, but it's shocking that we even have to have this discussion, was what was always said when it came to Labour anti-Semitism. And I think you're seeing a very similar thing here.
Sometimes it's actually wise to think like an Iranian grandmother. Okay, so I think about my grandmother. She was born in 1926. If she heard that sentence, we've never had this before, her first reaction would be, haven't we? I don't know, you tell me. Is Nadim Zahawi now a political encyclopedia? I can tell you, by the way, we have had it in the past. It was made with regards to Irish Catholics and Catholic votes in this country. The idea that, for instance, undue religious influence was coming from imams and religious figures was often claimed with regards to Lutfur Rahman and Tower Hamlets. And indeed, the very offences that he was alleged to be involved in were originally used against Catholics, 100 years ago plus. So first of all, this is not new. It's not never happened before. The treatment of Corbyn, well, we've never had someone on the front page of the Times list. Well, go back to the early 1980s and look at how the Sun newspaper treated Michael Foot. We absolutely have. That's the first thing. Secondly, had he ever heard of Democracy Volunteers before last night? This is a very serious allegation. We're going to talk about it for 20 minutes as if, the world...
Democracy Volunteer... For an issue to cause Democracy Volunteers to put up a comment 1 minute after the polls close, it must be incredibly serious. But again, Democracy Volunteers are saying it.
We've never had this before. No, we haven't, because presumably when this used to happen, somebody would get out of the police. Somebody's breaking the law. These are quite sensible responses. But again, I don't know what the hell is going on, because these aren't stupid people, or at least I don't think they are. We don't have sensible political analysis anymore. I don't know why. I don't know what's going on. It's getting worse. I'm not suggesting we have some golden age, but clearly we're going into some la-la land, I'll use that phrase again, which is, I will say it's unprecedented. You had also there, this is really important, Michael, you had Sonia Soda, a former, she's not been a Labour candidate, I don't think, but she's sought to be a Labour candidate in the past. She was an advisor at Ed Miliband. She was critical of Labour and Keir Starmer, but that's her political, and that's fine, that's her political affiliation historically. And you have Nadim Zahawi, of course, formerly a Tory, now Reform. Where's the Green person? Right? So you have BBC Question Time on the same day as the vote on the Thursday. BBC Question Time. You've got the ballots, you can't vote after 10 o'clock. BBC Question Time goes live at 10:30. It's easily the most explosive by-election result since 1962. Maybe even more so, certainly in my life, but there's no Green Party person there. There wasn't last Thursday either. And then on the show on Sky, there's no Green person either. And they're just concocting this nonsense. And then people worry about, we're losing trust and faith in democracy and the political process and the parties. Well, it's because you just deal in trivia and nonsense and lies and sometimes even defamation. I'm not saying Sky did. I think the Labour Party certainly veered into that at times with regards to their campaign. It's upsetting. It's really upsetting. The Greens just got 14,000 and a bit of votes. They've obviously done something interesting. They've obviously appealed to some people in that constituency in a way that nobody was expecting. That is the story, right? What regular punters are seeing is a white working class lady who's a plumber with a Northwest Manc accent talking. I don't see many people like that in politics. Why are you talking about this organisation I'd never heard of before as if it was a Nobel Peace Prize winning, sacrosanct agent of human sensibilities and rational, enlightened government? Without the democracy volunteers, we can't have democracy. I mean, Christ. And it's, I posted this on X, the meme that the right used to love sharing about they changed the microchip, about the thing that you get upset about in the back of the head. That's the right now. That's the right. They used to say that about the left, didn't they? Oh, they've changed one thing to get upset about. Now it's more rage about this. Literally, 10:01, the right, new chip. It's family influence, it's democracy volunteers. New chip, new chip, new chip. And here's the thing, Michael. The right are becoming all the things they claim to hate. Censorious, whinging, conspiratorial, negative. These were all the things they claimed about the left. Doing the country down all the time. They're becoming all the things they claim to hate. And that's a very, very dangerous thing to do, Never become the thing you hate.
Let's, for the final word on family voting, or so-called family voting, let's go to a clip from an interview. We'll be putting out the full interview over the weekend with Green Deputy Leader Muffin Ali.
I think that's just a sign of desperation. You know, I think the results haven't gone the way they thought they would, and I think it's just a sign of desperation. I've knocked on doors where the father has voted for Labour, and the mother and the children have voted Green. So if there's such thing as family voting, it hasn't obviously worked in those families where families have decided to go different ways. Everyone's going to discuss what policies they agree with, what direction they want the country to travel in. Do they want to stay in, do they want to be stuck in time, or do they want to actually move forward and come up with some fresh ideas? People are going to have those debates. That's expected, and that should be encouraged. What we shouldn't do is say, right, okay, people dictate how others vote, right? People shouldn't be able to influence and force others to vote in a particular way. And I don't think that's happened.
I mean, he seemed quite magnanimous there, didn't he?
He was very tired. He'd got up at 4 a.m. that
so
morning.
maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it wasn't him being diplomatic.
He's very magnanimous and calm. Yeah, I think he's got no energy. He'd got up at 4 a.m. He left Leeds at 6 a.m. and I think that was at like 4 a.m., 3 a.m. So he was probably knackered. He's obviously been campaigning non-stop for a month. I have to say as well, you know, Muffin Ali, you talk to him, a really affable, thoughtful, nice person. If you just read the newspapers, you'd think this guy is a demon. You know, it's a cliche that you're told so much. I remember my dad saying it to me, don't believe what you read in the newspapers, it's garbage. You know what? A lot of the time that's true.
The family voting allegations seem quite new. The fear-mongering about any coalition which includes both Muslims and the organised left is much more familiar. Been around for a while. Been around in many European countries, in fact. Some commentators are taking this to the extreme. Jake Wallace-Simons is the former editor of the Jewish Chronicle. He said, as the Iranian Revolution of 1979 showed, any coalition between progressives and Islamists ends up with the lefties being discarded when they have served their purpose amid a drive towards the imposition of Sharia. Will Hannah Spencer and the gay Jew Zach Polanski regret their role in accelerating the path to Sharia in Britain?
Well, we've been talking about the legalisation or decriminalisation of drugs a lot on this show. But you know what? You don't need to take drugs in this country. You can just read Jake Wallace-Simons in the Daily Telegraph. It's the same thing. It's a hell of a trip and doesn't make any sense.
Let's give the last word to one Muslim voter who called into LBC to explain why their community backed the Greens in Gorton and Denton.
A lot of Muslims who are religiously conservative actually just voted for a white working class woman and a party which is led by a very proud Jewish person who's also gay.
Yeah.
So all these stereotypes,
excellent observation.
Yeah, they don't matter much. And I think the other thing is that the Muslim community has been under siege by reform, by Matt Goodwin and others, because they've been talking about grooming gangs, and somehow it's as if sort of sexual abuse is a somewhat uniquely Muslim phenomena. And then you've seen Shabana Mahmood, who's a Pakistani, right? And she, of Pakistani origin, and she has made changes to indefinite leave to remain, which make it very, very difficult for the community to sort of have people come over, or people who are here, their lives are being disrupted, threatened, and disproportionately. So it should be no surprise that this community made a very political decision of switching. They used to be 85% for Labour. They have been switching, and they've switched towards Greens and your party and other left-wing factions, and they made that switch even more explicit.
I mean, the point was put very well there, right? Which is that if, you know, that Labour have been, I mean, island of strangers, whatever, they've been very willing to attack, or I suppose take a hostile stance, let's say, towards immigrant communities. Reform, obviously, just outright sort of calling Islam a threat to the country. If you're constantly like being negative about a community, then the whole point of democracy is that they can punish you for that. Like, that's not sectarianism. That's just like, leave us alone, please.
Yeah. I've said that younger Muslims were going Green and older ones were staying with Labour. I did hear older Muslims also going Green because of this issue of indefinite leave to remain being changed. Many people allegedly told Labour canvassers, it's, you know, you can do this policy if people are coming here next year, but for people already here and you changing the rules retrospectively when they've made plans, etc., That's not fair. Now, people watching or listening to this can agree or disagree with that, but I think it does probably feel intuitively unfair for many people. And again, it's like you said, something that costs Labour votes. That's how democracy works, right? If you don't like it, you probably shouldn't live in a democracy. That's just how it works. With a multi-party system, if the party that has power is letting you down, you go to another one. And this analysis of it's sectarianism if they disagree with me, it's community cohesion if they're on my side. This is so fatuous and childish. I've had enough of it, and I think the public's had enough of it too.
We're going to wrap up here. I will direct your attention to an interview that you did with Zach Polanski last night. Currently, I'm on 84,000 views in 10 hours. Check that out if you haven't already. I think there's probably going to be a couple more interviews going out over the weekend. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, nothing new, because the huge story emerged at 5:30 in the morning. But really interesting conversations with Rachel Millward, Deputy Leader of the Greens. She's down in Sussex, and Mutton Ali. Those will both go out, both really important conversations. And look, these are going to be frontline politicians now, aren't they? Especially after May. The Green Party is now a mainstream party. We didn't talk about it, but one of the things that Keir Starmer said is, the Greens don't have the resources to fight a general election. We do. The Greens are probably going to overtake Labour soon in terms of their membership. But again, he's just detached from reality. He's saying things from a script.
But they don't have Trevor Chin.
They don't have Trevor Chin, that's true. But they might have, Dale Vince or goodness knows who.
If you want to see Aaron at more by-election counts, stomping around more marginals, more episodes of Bastani's Britain, do make sure you subscribe to Novara Media, novaramedia.com/support. It's been a wonderful Friday evening with you on a remarkable day in British politics.
Has been remarkable. We use that word all the time in political journalism. We love hyperbole, but this is easily the most important by-election of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Thank you for spending it with us, or watching our commentary, I suppose. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. Have a great weekend. You've been watching Novara Media. Good night.